get ready to take off. We're about to fly to the ends of the Earth and beyond as we look at the greatest flights of all time. From the first powered flight to space flight, we'll see how flying has changed our lives in an era of innovation. In this incredible episode, we'll fly across the ocean with Charles Lindbergh and see what it's like to break the speed of sound, all milestones in aviation. From there, we fly off into the future. We'll meet the first space tourist, experience what happens when you try to fly at hypersonic speed, and see what the most expensive aircraft ever built can do. Finally, we look at new machines that actually fly like a bird. It's the future of flight.
Countdown. It's time to lift off on the most amazing flights of all time, here on Assignment Discovery.
As you watch milestones in aviation, keep these questions in mind.
Why was the Wright brothers' flight so significant?
How do transportation options affect the way we live, work, play, and travel? Did you know that in 1899, the Wright brothers wrote to the Smithsonian asking for information on flight? 4 years later, they were so convinced their 1903 aircraft invention would fly, they named it the Flyer. Can you name a famous plane?
I guess Air Force One is the most famous airplane.
Air Force One.
Concorde. Air Force One.
The Enola Gay, which is the plane that was used to drop the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
The U-2 spy planes during the Cold War were famous planes.
The B-52 is a very memorable plane.
The Spruce Goose, which was Howard Hughes' plane.
The famous pilots that come to mind are just Amelia Earhart. The Wright brothers were the people who had the first real airplane.
Charles Lindbergh's plane, the Spirit of St. Louis.
Try to imagine a world without phones, electricity, cars, or airplanes. The inventors who created these things that we take for granted turned their dreams into realities. It took hard work and experimentation. In the late 1800s, Alexander Graham Bell invented the telephone, changing the way we communicate. And Thomas Edison kept us from the dark with a simple light bulb. In the early 1900s, the inventions of Henry Ford and the Wright brothers forever changed the way we get from place to place. We call the time they lived the era of innovation. In 1927, 2 years after commercial flight began, and only 25 years after Orville Wright's famous 12-second flight, Charles Lindbergh made a 3,000-mile journey across the Atlantic Ocean in a single-winged plane called the Spirit of St. Louis. Lindbergh was attempting the first successful non-stop flight from New York to Paris. His financial backers had sponsored him, hoping to win the $25,000 Orteig Prize being offered for the feat. Lindbergh guessed he would be flying solo for nearly 2 days. Several other pilots had already tried to fly solo across the Atlantic, and 5 had died. Charles Lindbergh later wrote an account of his famous flight. Here is a recreation of this amazing feat.
I'm giving up both land and day. I look back at the lowering silhouette of the mountains, still sharp against the western sky. What a strange feeling. America at a distance. For sustenance, I have 5 quarts of water, lacking a few swallows, and 5 sandwiches.
To lighten the plane's weight, Lindbergh flew without radio, parachute, or rubber dinghy. If he went down over the Atlantic, he was beyond help. Lindbergh had only slept for 1 hour the previous night in New York. By that night, he was already tired. On top of that, he was navigating with only a magnetic compass, crude by today's standards. He was hoping to find Paris using this simple compass.
The monotony of flying with my eyes always on the instrument board. The Spirit of St. Louis is high-strung and balanced to a pinpoint. If I relax pressure on stick or rudder for an instant, the nose will veer off course.
So he wouldn't crash into the Atlantic at night, Lindbergh climbed to a higher altitude.
It's cold up here. I glance at the altimeter, 10,500 feet. Cold. I pull the flashlight from my pocket and throw its beam onto a strut. The edge is irregular and shiny. Ice. I've got to get back into clear air quickly.
Lindbergh's only choice was to get out of the ice quickly and drop down to the waves again. Now he would have to stay awake or risk a crash into the ocean. Dawn on the second day, and Lindbergh was exhausted.
I've lost command of my eyelids. When they start to close, I can't restrain them. All I want to do in life is to throw myself down flat, stretch out, and sleep. I've got to find some way of keeping alert. I try running fast on the floorboards for as many seconds as the Spirit of St. Louis will hold the course. I push first one wing down, then the other, to blow fresh air through the cockpit. I never wanted so badly to sleep. While I'm staring at the instruments, during an unearthly age of time, both conscious and asleep, the fuselage behind me becomes filled with ghostly presences, vaguely outlined forms, transparent, moving, riding weightless with me in the plane. For the first time in my life, I doubt my ability to endure.
It was now noon on the second day. Lindbergh was still 1,000 miles from Paris. He'd been over the Atlantic for more than 24 hours.
Fishing boats. The coast. The European coast can't be far away. The ocean is no longer a dangerous wilderness.
Lindbergh had reached the western coast of Ireland. Paris was next. He had already conquered the Atlantic Ocean. At the end of the second day, an exhausted Lindbergh landed at Le Bourget Airport in Paris. He'd been flying non-stop for 34 hours.
What limitless possibilities aviation holds when planes can fly non-stop between New York and Paris. The year will surely come when passengers and mail fly every day from America to Europe. Possibly everyone will travel by air in another 50 years.
Charles Lindbergh was right, thanks to one kind of plane, the American Boeing 747. Intercontinental travel has increased rapidly since 1968.
The 747 really brought travel into the era of mass transit, and it went from being a relatively elite thing to do, to fly. It made it accessible to everybody.
In the 35 years since its first flight, the 747 has carried 3.6 billion passengers. That's half the world's population. 747s have flown 35 billion miles in those 35 years. That's enough to make 74,000 trips to the moon and back. The 747 is so big that the Wright brothers' first flight at Kitty Hawk could have taken place in the economy section of the plane. From end to end, it's almost as long as an 18-story building. But the 747 would never have gotten off the ground without the creation of the jet propulsion engine. Designed by the British inventor Sir Frank Whittle, the engine changed military and civil aviation. In a century of flight, it's one of the most important innovations. During World War II, Great Britain secretly designed the first jet fighter using Frank Whittle's new engine. The jet age was about to begin. Captain Eric Brown, a British test pilot of the Royal Navy, was one of the first people to see this plane in action in May 1941.
I was surprised to see the huge number of civilians that appeared to be on their air station, and there was also a strange air, almost of conspiratorial excitement going on. At about 7 o'clock, this extraordinary airplane was wheeled out. It was tiny, but didn't have a propeller. It started up and made a very strange whistling noise, taxied to the end of the runway, and took off. But I still really didn't realize what it was. I had no concept of a jet airplane at that time at all.
Propeller-driven aircraft couldn't fly very high or fast. Here's how the jet engine works. It consists of one basic moving part, the compressor. Attached to a fan at the rear, the compressor sucks in air. Fuel is injected into the high-pressure air at the front, ignited and pushed out the back, sending the plane forward. So the jet engine allowed planes to fly faster and higher than ever before. Eric Brown made a career out of testing the new high-speed planes. This is his attempt to make the risky first landing of a jet on an aircraft carrier. Eric Brown has set a series of world records. Since his first landing on a carrier, he's made 2,406 more, and he's test flown almost 500 types of planes. But this plane is the test pilot's dream, the most remarkable jet fighter ever built. First made in the early 1960s, the Harrier Jet can perform unique tricks. It can hover, take off vertically, and move sideways. All these feats make it a fearsome ground attack plane. 800 Harrier fighters have been operational around the world. Only the most highly skilled pilots can fly this jet.
It is an outstanding aircraft to fly. I've been flying for 16 years now, 18 years almost, I suppose, and never ceases to bring a smile on my face. I love it. If it's got a full load of weapons, it can take off in a very short distance, which is, again, a unique attribute of this particular aircraft. Because of the engine design, you do get a good acceleration on the runway, a good kick in the pants. It's a very accomplished ground attack plane. The concept was designed by the Brits. The US Marine Corps saw that and decided to take it the next step.
The Harrier can slow down dramatically in air-to-air combat. It can even fly backwards.
I've landed it on small roads in Germany where they've literally stopped the traffic. The school buses, I remember hovering next to a school bus, moving left and actually landing on the pad. In fact, once on an autobahn, under one bridge and over the next, so it can operate in some extreme conditions.
The Harrier Jet was flown in 2001 during the war in Afghanistan, and most recently in the war in Iraq. But it does have a major disadvantage. The jet is not supersonic. It can't go faster than the speed of sound, which is 760 miles per hour. Today, spacecraft and supersonic airplanes routinely break the sound barrier. It was only some 50 years ago that the race to fly faster than the speed of sound began. By 1947, the American military had built the X-1, a rocket-powered bullet-shaped plane. Its pilot was Chuck Yeager.
We were hamstrung because of the effects of the speed of sound on all of our airplanes. And the country that gets above the speed of sound learns how to control the airplane is the guy that's going to rule the skies.
Great Britain was also attempting to break the sound barrier. The British military were flying the DH-108, an experimental jet. This plane was faster than the X-1, and it was dangerous. 3 test pilots had been killed in crashes before Eric Brown took over.
My successor in aerodynamics flight at Farnborough was killed. We are not 100% sure why.
Both the British and American pilots were finding that the closer they got to flying at Mach 1, the speed of sound, the more difficult it was to control the plane. But Eric Brown was determined to try.
If you didn't recover from the spin straight away, you would not recover. Very lethal indeed.
After many attempts, Eric Brown and the British realized it was impossible to break the sound barrier flying the DH-108. Now it was up to the Americans. On October 14, 1947, Chuck Yeager was on his 50th test flight.
On October the 14th, we didn't know we could get above Mach 1, but the mission was to try.
Approaching the speed of 760 miles per hour, shock waves built up on the wing surfaces and tail. Chuck Yeager's plane shook violently, becoming dangerously unstable. No pilot had managed to get through this before, but Yeager stuck with it. After his plane hit Mach 1, he was moving faster than the speed of sound and broke through the shock waves. Once he passed through the sound barrier, his flight returned to its routine smoothness. Chuck Yeager was the first person to break the sound barrier.
On the way down, I was fooling around doing rolls and things like that. And the thing that went through my mind is that it really wasn't as hard as we thought it would be. And we came on down and landed and looked at the data, and it was a milestone that the whole world had been trying to accomplish. We did it with the X-1. And it gave us a quantum jump over the rest of the world in technologies.
"30 years after Chuck Yeager's record-breaking attempt, it was possible to fly through the sound barrier in comfort, thanks to the Concorde. This plane flew at twice the speed of sound, or Mach 2, round trip from London to New York and Paris to New York each day until 2003.
Cruising level at Mach 0.95, 95% of the speed of sound. You would just go gently through the speed of sound, and you'd know you're through the speed of sound because as the shock waves start to form, all the pressure instruments give a slight kick.
At Mach 2, the Concorde can fly faster than the speed of a rifle bullet.
As Concorde travels supersonically, she's going so fast that the whole aeroplane heats up. In fact, she stretches between 6 and 10 inches in flight. Fortunately, the designers thought of that. There's a section between the flight engineer's panel and the piece behind where you can't get a sheet of paper on that gap on the ground, but in the air it opens up and you can get your whole hand in there. There's an apocryphal story about one of the early pilots putting his hat in that gap in supersonic flight. When he came down and landed, he couldn't get it out. When we're crossing the Atlantic, the only people that are higher than us are astronauts in the International Space Station.
In October 2003, the Concorde retired after nearly 30 years of flying passengers in speed and style. One aircraft easily outpaces Concorde, the Space Shuttle. Flying at Mach 25, that's about 19,000 miles per hour. It's the fastest and most versatile plane ever built. It's almost like a toy transformer. Beginning as a supersonic rocket, it changes into a satellite orbiting in space and then lands as a glider. Phase 1, the Space Shuttle is a rocket plane with the fastest acceleration ever.
The most dangerous aspect of the space flight is definitely the launch phase because of the tremendous energy that we have to harness to get ourselves accelerated into space.
We have Commander Charles Precourt, pilot Dominic Gorey.
At liftoff, you're laying on your back, looking vertically into the sky above you.
8, 7, 6, 5, 4. We've gone for main engine start. We have main engine start.
We have booster ignition and liftoff.
So you're much like coming off the launch pad, a shot out of the barrel of a gun, but the bullet has its own propulsion system and continues to push you. We reached Mach 1 in the first 50 seconds. It's a sensation at liftoff and throughout the first 8 minutes that a giant hand has reached in under your chair and pushed you into the air. But the push never stops. It continues to push. We are just under Mach 5 at the point when the boosters separate, which is 2 minutes and 9 seconds. To stay in orbit, we go from 0 to Mach 25 in 8.5 minutes, which is 25 times the speed of sound, which in rough terms is 25,000 feet per second. Paris to London would be on the order of 50 seconds.
Phase 2, the space shuttle turns into an orbiting satellite. Traveling through space at a speed of Mach 25, this shuttle's mission was to resupply the Russian Mir space station. Then after a week, the space shuttle falls out of orbit and becomes a glider. That's phase 3 of the flight.
Basically, we come out of orbit halfway around the Earth. Almost an hour or so from touchdown, we enter the atmosphere, clear around the other side of the Earth, and then we glide through the atmosphere, starting at Mach 25. The atmosphere gets thicker and thicker as we come lower, which slows us down progressively from Mach 25 to 20 to 15 to 10.
As the air gets denser, friction causes the space shuttle to heat up. The outside of the vehicle reaches 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit. Ceramic tiles on the shield protect the crew from the extreme temperatures.
It is very much like landing a glider with the worst lift-to-drag ratio you can imagine. We're not a very good glider. We're more like a brick, but we have to use glider-type techniques to manage our energy. We will be at approximately 360 miles per hour, almost twice the speed of an average airliner when it touches down.
Report beginning to flare up Discovery's nose. Gorey preparing to drop the landing gear.
We have come a tremendous amount of distance from a 12-second flight in 1903. There's no doubt about it. It's absolutely phenomenal.
During the era of innovation, the way we travel radically changed. In less than 100 years, we moved from the Wright's first 12 seconds of powered flight to achieving non-stop transatlantic flights, breaking the sound barrier, and orbiting Earth at 25 times the speed of sound.
Now that you've seen milestones in aviation, take a moment to talk about the following.
Why was the Wright brothers' flight so significant?
How do transportation options affect the way we live, work, play, and travel? If you'd like to learn more about what you've just seen, go online or check out these books at your local library.
As you watch the future of flight, keep these questions in mind. What kind of planes do you think you'll be flying in the future?
Why is flying at hypersonic speeds so difficult? You've seen how aircraft have evolved over the years. Improvements in flight are constantly changing, and now in the 21st century, regular flights beyond the sky into space might become the norm. What do you like or don't like about flying?
I like the whole fact that you're going somewhere new or somewhere that you have been before, but you're going to a different place.
I like looking down through the window at night.
To tell you the truth, I've always been a huge fan of airplanes, and ever since I was a little kid, I've had model airplanes, and it's always been such a thrill for me to go on an airplane.
I actually like the food on airplanes. It's very enjoyable.
The plane food is always horrible, and I guess it's always cold on airplanes because they can't, because they're so high up that it's freezing, it's cold outside, and the fact that your ears pop on landing and takeoff.
I like in an airplane when you're taking off and the forces are really pushing against you and you can really feel it as you're going up in the air and you're going all like that.
I get a little queasy sometimes when I take off and land in airplanes, so I don't really like that part. When I was little, my older brother and I were on a plane with my parents, and it had a lot of turbulence, and we thought it was a roller coaster ride, and that it was a lot of fun. My parents were getting sick.
The seatbelt never fits correctly.
When you're up there in the air, sometimes you can't get the thought of crashing out of your head, and when that happens, it's a scary experience.
It's breaking some kind of laws that people once held to be true, that you can't fly. So, I look at those guys in history who said you can't fly, and I'm like, shut up, I'm flying.
The first century of aviation began with the Wright brothers' historic 12-second flight and concluded with regular flights to outer space. Where will the next 100 years of aviation take us? Could space become the tourist destination of the future? Is space tourism too dangerous? Is it too expensive? Today, people can buy almost anything on the internet, including an adventure in space. One company offers this space package, a 14-day orbital qualification program, which includes medical tests and zero-gravity training. Cost? $200,000. If you survive this, there's an 8-day rocket trip to the International Space Station. The cost this time? $20 million. South African multimillionaire Mark Shuttleworth is one of only 2 space tourists who've taken this offer. After 8 months training in Russia, he paid his $20 million to join cosmonauts for 8 days in the International Space Station.
It's a great privilege after many months of training to be sitting here with this great crew. As long as I can remember that I've known about spaceflight, it's been my dream to fly.
In April 2002, Shuttleworth was launched into space on a Soyuz rocket from the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan. We asked 2 aviation experts to try to predict the future of space travel. Graham Warwick is the American editor of Flight International magazine.
NASA's goal, European Space Agency's long-term goal, is for travel into space to be as routine as travel across the Atlantic. We are decades away from that.
Richard Abulafia runs a research group in Washington that studies new aviation technology.
Space tourism is one of the most easily oversold concepts in the world. What you're basically asking people to do is take an amount of money with which they could buy a small tropical island to call their own forever and spend days in a terrible atmosphere eating horrible food. It's inconceivable that more than a small number of extremely wealthy people would consider this.
Because spaceflight is so expensive, NASA has been working on a revolutionary form of high-speed propulsion. It's called hypersonic flight, which is at least Mach 5, 5 times the speed of sound. Hypersonic flight is the goal of 21st century space travel. To accomplish it, NASA is trying to fly a new engine called a scramjet that takes in oxygen from the upper atmosphere. The huge heavy oxygen fuel tanks currently used to launch the shuttle will not be needed. The idea is to make the shuttle lighter and less expensive to launch. This is NASA's X-43A scramjet research vehicle, planned to fly at hypersonic speeds. It's hoped a much larger version of the X-43A will one day power the shuttle.
It's an air-breathing engine, and what that means is we're taking air out of the atmosphere. With rockets, you have to carry your oxidizer with you, but if you can take the oxygen that's readily available out of the air and use that in your engine, then you don't have to carry it with you and you save all that weight. When you consider for sending stuff to space, your vehicle is mostly fuel and your payload is relatively small. And so if you could gain some weight savings and use that for larger payloads.
By losing the oxygen fuel tanks, NASA calculates the weight savings will be as much as 85%. This computer animation shows how NASA expects the scramjet to work in its first experiment.
The booster will ignite and boost up to Mach 7. Then the two vehicles would separate. The engine would ignite. The hydrogen mixed with the highly compressed oxygen that we get from the atmosphere.
If it then flew at hypersonic speeds, a new form of propulsion would have been born. The computer simulation shows what the NASA scientists and engineers thought would happen. But on the first unmanned test flight, the difficulties of hypersonic flight became apparent.
Launch on my mark. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Launch, launch, launch. Yes, this is away. Dropping. We are unstable. Ignition.
Unfortunately, on the first flight, we did have a mishap with the launch vehicle.
Out of control.
About 8 seconds after ignition, the launch vehicle rockets began to oscillate out of control.
Now dropping. We're going to have thermite.
We had to actually terminate.
If one day NASA can make the X-43A work, they plan a manned hypersonic vehicle, the X-43B. But the manned version could be as much as 30 years into the future. For years, experts have been talking about commercial airlines using hypersonic scramjets to fly passengers to and from distant cities more than 5 times as fast. Is this dream possible?
It's going to take huge technological change that the aerospace world probably can't affect to get passengers from London to Tokyo in 2 hours, because the amount of capital required would be huge.
NASA's big idea behind the X-43A scramjet of eliminating the weight of fuel will save a great deal of money, but it requires many more years of research. Now let's look at a new rocket plane that might make space travel even cheaper. A company called Kelly Space and Technology of California is planning the Astroliner. Its takeoff weight gets reduced because a 747 tows it to 20,000 feet, where its rockets then ignite. This makes the vehicle much smaller and lighter. For $250,000, passengers will get a 2-hour trip to the edge of space.
What a passenger will experience is there'll be a couple of days of training, perhaps on a weekend, and the weekend will culminate with the flight. Then we'll climb up over the ocean and to our launch point, and at 20,000 feet we'll release the tow line. The rocket engines will light, and that is when you're going to get that initial kick of thrust, and you'll be pushed back into your seat. It'll be a bit noisy, but it'll be the best experience you've ever had in your life.
Passengers will fly 60 miles above the Earth when the rocket from the smaller vehicle is fired.
And at that point in time, you'll be experiencing zero gravity. You'll feel like your insides are floating. It'll be a unique experience. You'll get to feel that for about 15 to 20 minutes as you're coming through a ballistic arc to get ready to re-enter. And then as you re-enter, you'll start to feel additional gravity forces on your body, feel a little bit more normal. Then you'll be gliding down as you normally would be in a glider operation.
Kelly Space hopes to save energy and money with its launch system.
We've basically eliminated the 2 solid rocket boosters on the side of the shuttle, and we've replaced it with a 747 aircraft that can act as a tow vehicle to tow a glider-like launch vehicle off the ground up into the air to about 20,000 feet. So basically, we've gained 20,000 feet in altitude. We've eliminated the necessity for a huge facility launch infrastructure that supports vertical takeoff.
Astroliner will be able to cut the cost of putting satellites in space, too. Satellites are currently launched in shuttles and rockets, and they are purposely heavy to withstand the great vibrations of liftoff.
Presently, it costs about $10,000 a pound to put things into space. Our initial suborbital launch vehicles will probably be around $1,000 a pound to put payloads into space.
Mike Gallo compares the space situation today to when companies were making giant mainframe computers before personal computers were available.
I say watch the small businesses of the future, and that's going to be the key to who we're going to see lead the way in space launch technology. But compared to $20 million, $250,000 is just a nit.
But the predictions are that space travel will remain very expensive for a long time. So what will be the shape and feel of everyday commercial airline flight in the 21st century? What kind of plane will you be traveling on in 25 years? Planes today cost a lot to build and operate. These costs won't get any cheaper in the next 100 years. So airlines of the future will look for the most cost-effective solutions.
In 50 years' time, I suspect we will recognize a lot of what is flying around in the sky because it may not be a lot different to what it looks like today.
I'd like to think that in 40 or 50 years, commercial jetliners would look kind of cool and high-tech. But I have a sneaking suspicion they're going to look like tubes with swept wings and engines hung beneath the wings, and they might even be versions of today's planes.
The workhorse of the sky, the Boeing 747, will still be flying 30 years from now. But by 2006, it will have a big new rival: the double-decker Airbus A380. The future A380 will fly at the same speed as the 747, but it will hold more passengers on 2 decks and have restaurants, libraries, and luxury rest areas. Airbus says the flying future begins in 2006.
I think there's no question that large 4-engine planes are the future. By the year 2030, 2040, the Airbus's A380 will have great relevance. It's the future, given the projected growth numbers.
Next, we look at the future of air wars. Experts predict that military aircraft aren't going to look all that different in the future. Military planes produced over the last 40 years were so sophisticated and expensive, it's unlikely they're going to be scrapped in the near future. The most extraordinary plane, and certainly the most expensive in America's arsenal, is the B-2 bomber, also known as the stealth bomber. With an unrefueled range of 6,000 miles, stealth technology, and a crew of 2, the bomber is considered invulnerable. At $2 billion apiece, the B-2 bomber is the most expensive aircraft ever built. Each plane costs more than the space shuttle. But here is a new craft that defines the future. This is Predator, an unmanned air vehicle, or UAV. Predator is 48 feet long, weighs 2,300 pounds, and can cruise for 40 hours. Predator is designed to operate as a spy plane at 10,000 feet over enemy territory.
The idea was that we would develop an airplane that could fly missions that pilots had no business being involved in. Long-duration missions, missions that were extremely dangerous. Predators have been very active in the Balkans for the last 7 years, Kuwait area. They're active over Afghanistan. We're not competing with manned airplanes. We have a pilot in the loop. It's just that our pilot doesn't go with the airplane.
Predator is operated by a team of pilots and engineers working at this portable ground control station.
We have a pilot's cockpit we call a ground control station. It has a side stick controller like an F-16, throttle, rudder pedals, toe brakes, nose wheel steering for ground operation.
For its role as a spy plane, Predator uses a camera with a huge 900mm lens built into the nose. Our camera crew is an easy target when Predator flies directly overhead with its enormous lens.
The airplane will operate up to 25,000 feet, and we've got pretty decent pictures from that altitude. This particular truck we're about a little over 3 miles away from right now.
But will unmanned aircraft replace pilots in the future?
Well, I don't think manned airplanes will ever disappear. I think we all feel a lot more comfortable knowing we have a pilot up in the front flying an airplane full of passengers. There are many, many missions that man in the cockpit in a tactical airplane is essential for decision-making on the spot.
To find the next big breakthrough and attain more efficient flight, NASA is looking to nature. Birds adapt their wings for different air conditions. Scientists and engineers want to build planes capable of these same wing movements. This F-18 jet fighter has wings that engineers are trying to move. NASA sees these wing warping experiments as the next big innovation in flying efficiency. It's engineered the computer-assisted wings on this aircraft so they'll twist and change shape like a bird's.
Men are always trying to be as efficient as birds are. What we hope to do by using primarily these two leading-edge surfaces is actually twist the structure in a positive way so that the wing is actually contributing in a positive fashion to performance.
NASA is getting close. On a test rig in a hangar, the wings have been made to move partly like a bird's.
The Wright brothers, in fact, used what was known as wing warping technology to actually turn their airplane. They actually had ropes that were attached to the outboard sections of the wings, and by simply pulling on the ropes, they were able to twist the wing that then caused the airplane to roll and turn. Well, birds do a very similar kind of activity with their feathers. Their muscles, their feathers, they can actually vary the shape of their wing.
In the 2nd century of manned flight, people do not yet fully understand how birds fly. In this California desert, 2 retired NASA engineers and pilots are trying to find out.
Right at us, Bob. Ready, 3, 2, 1, drop.
They've built experimental bird-like structures with radio-controlled wings. The long-term aim is to try to make aircraft more efficient.
We're looking at a very complex machine. Birds are very complex, there's no question about that. But we can't flap yet. That's coming. I think eventually we'll figure out how to do the flexible wing and figure out how to make them flap. But right now we're not there yet. So when we can do that, then I think we'll find an application that will be useful in the full-scale airplane.
Studies of bird flight have also influenced the development of this huge plane. This is Helios. It's an unpiloted solar-powered aircraft controlled from the ground.
Well, Helios is a large solar-powered airplane. We fly at very high altitude. We're designing this thing to be able to fly almost indefinitely.
Helios is a simple idea that may provide an alternative to space launch satellites. Its wings are huge solar panels that power electric motor-driven propellers. NASA is so excited by the idea, they have put money into flight testing the Helios prototype. With its year-round sunny climate and clear airspace, Hawaii is the test area. It's dawn, and today Helios is going for world records. Using solar power only, it's going to try to fly higher than any known aircraft. To act as an alternative to space launch satellites, Helios will have to hang around at a height of 20 miles. A typical airplane will fly at 5 to 6 miles high.
Slow, 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 stop. To have them get on right away so we can proceed with aircraft power up.
Its row of tiny solar-powered electric motors lifts Helios off the ground.
This airplane is fragile, and we're very limited in the weather we can handle at low altitude. So we have to pick a really nice day to launch.
Airspeed 32. Roger. Okay, and you're airborne. Airspeed down.
Helios in its present configuration is 6 wing panels, total 247 feet of wingspan. bigger than a 747. It's an extremely lightweight airplane. It's projected to weigh about 1,900 pounds with its energy storage system installed. Flight speed for this airplane is quite low. At sea level for takeoff and landing, we'll be flying at around 25 miles per hour. And this airplane is very flexible, so it changes shape radically when it hits bumps in the air.
Today, many potential investors, including NASA, are watching Helios' record height attempt.
Go ahead, NASA 2.
We've been watching you bounce around 96.5 for quite a while now, and I think it's time to probably call it a record flight. Congratulations, I think it's time to turn around.
This record height of 18 miles means there's a real possibility that NASA can use this machine for communications, surveillance, and launching space satellites. With its solar batteries losing power, Helios cruises back to Earth at night. The next step is to develop rechargeable batteries so this vehicle, inspired by the flight of birds, can stay up indefinitely. In a century that saw us first fly, then go faster than the speed of sound, to a future where it may be possible to fly at 10 times the speed of sound, scientists today, like the Wright brothers 100 years before them, are looking to birds for insight into flight.
You've been given all the information. Now it's your turn to discuss the questions. Take a moment to talk about the following.
What kinds of planes do you think you'll be flying in the future?
Why is flying at hypersonic speed so difficult? We hope you've enjoyed this assignment discovery exploration into an era of innovation.
If you'd like to learn more about what you've just seen, go online or check out these books at your local library.